Makes you get away with the draft. For today.
Here we go.
When I say not bad, I guess that's a relative term.
Could be more to talk about taxes.
Yeah, could have been worse, but never could have been worse, yeah. He tries to get you to get everything for the part of March, and then there's a list that you keep working on, right, until.
Yeah, the emails never stop, back and forth.
Do it file extension.
I don't think you have to this year, because I think they extended because of the last year's events. Was that the year before last?
I know they did with the COVID years ago.
Well, I know, we had the fires, they did that for sure, but,
That's right.
but, I mean, my account, he like, even though we have that ability to extend it, I was like, I don't want to do it. So, a good way to get reading, I mean, I kind of agree.
Well, I do, I have a couple of things that people just for
Oh, yeah.
it's like, if I can't get the information.
Yeah, you're probably talking about like cable or something.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're not really due out until March.
Right.
So that creates a time crunch for finishing up anything.
I used to try to be absolutely safe. They would send out a preliminary, or cable, or whatever. Just so they could say they sent one out. You could file a deadline, and then they revise it April 20th. No, what,
I mean, because once you file, then you're not the prior
I had
year.
to do that one year because I didn't know it was preliminary. And, you know, when I got the new one, I called the why are you guys doing this?
I've got, I don't know, we do a lot of rough estimates.
We went to baseball practice at 6, so we missed
Yeah,
the
I
rains.
see myself.
So as soon as practice ended, it was starting to sprinkle a little bit.
I just got rid of that part of it last Friday, so that's all over with. Yep.
Well, is that a homeless thing? Just get our bus?
Yes, it's homeless bail.
Wow, that's kind of neat.
It's got spitting out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're gonna have a little different class here tonight. Let's see here, bit. I knew we wouldn't have many because of the rain, but I'm glad you're here. Let's bow and word prayer. We begin. Our holy God, you're the only true and living God, and we are humbled that we can even approach you, and that you would listen to us is amazing beyond our comprehension. thank you, Father, for the day that we have enjoyed, for the rain that you will bring to our land, for the mercy that you have given to so many of us, your patience, your long-suffering, and most of all, your Son, the gift of eternal life through his sacrifice. Our Father, as we open your word tonight, and we consider those things that were happening just before your Son came to this earth, help us to have a better understanding and a clearer appreciation for the world as it was then and the battle that our Lord had to fight to bring salvation to the world. Please forgive us. When we fall short and fail you, we ask for your continued patience and mercy and forgiveness. Through Christ we pray. Amen. All right, Sunday morning we talked about the lineage of Herod the Great, of where he came from, who his ancestors were, which doesn't mean much to us, but was huge to Jews in the first century. Much disputed his legitimacy as, quote, king of the Jews. And looking at that, we have seen just a few things, and you can read. There's quite a bit online about the house of Herod as he came to be. I have said this most of my life as I studied this, and occasionally taught this, not as fully developed as what you're going to be getting here this quarter. But I'm surprised there hasn't been really a mini-series on the house of Herod. There's been a few little TV movies like that, but the story of Herod and his children have every sordid thing that the world looks for today in entertainment. It's just a stunning, amazing story as you look at it. But we're going to try to cover some things that my guess would be you likely have not studied in the past. And from Daniel's comments, I guess I better get over here so you see me. So Daniel he's going to be streaming this. That his comments reminded me that many of our brethren, many people, Christians, even people who have studied the Bible, aren't really clear about the temples and all what was going on before Herod. So tonight I'm going to take a few moments and look at this. The list we have up here, the four main projects, the reason why Herod was so involved in construction, as we had noted Sunday, that he was a vassal king, which means he had his power from Rome, and which also meant that he could not on his own authority go out and invade a country or start a war. He did in Galilee go after local terrorists. Boy, isn't that a new phenomenon? There were terrorists all over Galilee, and he would raise up armies within the Galileans and chase them down and bring them to justice. So in that regard, he was, everyone loved that. We want law and order kind of a deal. Things just keep repeating themselves through history. While I cough. And they're looking for leaders that will keep them safe, but they don't like the way they keep them safe. And that's a brief summation of Herod's life. But looking at his reign as king of the Jews, he realized that the only way he could really continue his authority and his control would be through construction. And so he, more than any king of that era, brought extraordinary advantages to the people in Judea. And while there are several more, the four major ones are Masada, that was the desert retreat we saw Sunday morning, that's out there by the Dead Sea, that ironically he never used. He built it there for his safety. When he knew eventually there would be a coup and someone would come after him, so he built a private refuge on top of this desert butte. And it was used, but not by him. After the Romans had invaded in about 69 AD, where they would eventually destroy the temple, 900 of the zealot Jews went out to Masada, and they held up on top. And the Romans chased them down, and they killed them all in 73 AD. So Masada was built for Herod, but it was used by these rebellious Jews long after the temple had been destroyed. The second, of course, would be the temple, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. And then, Lord willing, Sunday morning we'll be looking at Herodium, which is his palace, which has some significance with the birth of Christ. And then finally, the city of Caesarea, which is his crowning glory. People would turn and say, well, what about the temple? To the Jews, the temple was magnificent and important and great, and they were grateful for that. But to the world, nothing would match Caesarea. Caesarea would become the Alexandria city of the East, that he was going to make it on a par with Alexandria, which was a pretty lofty goal, and he matched it and beat it. It's so fascinating to look at that. But Lord willing, that'll be Sunday or the following week. Tonight we're going to look at the temple here. There's Masada, as we studied Sunday, the desert refuge for Herod and his family. All of that was for one man. The people in the back, as we had noted, I'll just go ahead and do this again. Here's the granaries for all the food right there. The people that were the staff would live back here. This was his palace. This was his spa. He had a swimming pool over here, and then he had two tiers of palaces. That's where the fire would heat up the water to fire up his spa, and that was the Roman bath that every ruler had everywhere. Wherever they went, they built these. They had to have their baths. This is the shot as it's seen behind the Dead Sea. So you see it's not far from the Dead Sea at all, and I'll just repeat for those of you who weren't here Sunday. You look at that, and when I stood out there on that top, and I think, I'm looking out at Ocotillo Wells. I'm looking at Plaster City. I'm looking at the Salton Sea. I'm looking way up there at the Coachella Valley. It's just so similar in the topography. It's so much like that. There's another shot that shows the ramp that the Romans built to finally go up there and break through the walls and slaughter all the people in there. And modern days, that's how you would climb up there if you didn't take the tram. Now, we're going to look at the temples now. This is where we want to make sure everything is clarified here. If you have any question, or if I've said something you're not quite sure, if you never heard, raise your hand. We'll devote the entire hour tonight just to understanding about the temple. There were 3 temples. The first temple, of course, the most famous, was Solomon's temple. And what I will show you were obviously artist rendering of what they believed Solomon's temple would have looked like. One of the things that distinguished Solomon's temple from the others, of course, was the glory, as we had mentioned Sunday, when Zerubbabel had rebuilt the temple and they dedicated it. The men wept because they remembered the glory of Solomon's temple, and this one didn't match up with Zerubbabel's. But the first one here had this interesting giant basin of water supported by 12 calves. Interesting, you look at that and say, well, were they made of brass or they gold? Didn't the golden calf get them in trouble before? But this is what they were, this is how Solomon was told to build this. And that was full of water, and the little carts down here were portable, that they would pour water in them, and this was all for the ceremonial washings of the priests and the people. The idea of water washing their sins spiritually dates all the way back to Solomon and before. Yes?
When the Mormon temple opened here in San Diego years ago, they allowed visiting before only Mormons could enter.
Right.
And it's like they have an identical font like
Do they?
this. And there's 12 calves
Yeah.
around it, and it's amazing to see the size of it. And all.
It's
And,
huge.
Right.
it would be interesting. I hope that, I've heard they may have an open house again, and it's really interesting to go see.
They
Really?
have to rip the carpet out.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
but
say
they had
that.
to rip
I was
the
gonna say,
carpet
well,
out.
I remember that.
They have to rip the carpet out if the unbelievers walk.
Yeah.
They put brand new carpet in. They
Is
opened it up.
that what happened here?
That's it.
Too many unbelievers are on this carpet, so yeah, that is it. I'm sure we would all be impressed with the gold, but quite frankly, cathedrals around the world to this day And the most famous, of course, is St. Peter's Basilica. If you've ever been there, the gold is just, after a while, it's just, it's just like, this is like a religious Las Vegas. It's just too much glitter. The thing that would probably impress most of us would be the scale of what you said, of how big this was. And so the Holy of Holies would have been, the holy place would have been extraordinary, not to mention the Holy of Holies. But this is the scale that they had, and this is roughly what Solomon's temple, as some artist rendering had, that it would look like. But this is the first temple. The second temple then, as we'll explain here in a moment, was built when the remnant returned from Babylonian captivity. And Zerubbabel was commissioned with that project. And you see Zerubbabel here now basically built on the ruins of the mount. It was Solomon that would come in, and this is something I wish I had the video. When we were able to go to Jerusalem, they had this special thing you could go through back here to the rabbis, and they would show you something about the temple. And boy, it was one of these epiphanies, the aha moment, is that they had about a 6-foot square model, clay model of the topography of the Valley of Hinnom, the Kidron Valley, and where the city of David would be. And it was just basically a ridge, and this ridge came down to one point here. And what they did was they took about a 3-foot by 4-foot piece of plywood that had a fence built around it, and they took it and they just laid it over that ridge and said, here's Solomon's Mount. Oh, that's what he did. It just was, he took everything, and that's not level ground. It's very steep. And Solomon just built a giant, have you seen these shopping, in some places where there's mountain, they will cut and fill to put in a shopping center or something like that. I know they did back in the south in Birmingham. It took a couple of years. They just blasted and filled and leveled everything out and then built them all on top of it, because they couldn't have done it the way the topography was there. What Solomon did was he just built everything up and made it level. That's why on the northeast corner, the walls aren't, they're high, but the southwest corner, it's huge. That's what's generally called the pinnacle of the temple. That's where traditionally the devil had taken Jesus and told him to jump off. You go there and it's really tall because the topography of the land was so irregular. Solomon built everything up and leveled it out and put that giant courtyard out there. Well, this Zerubbabel built on top of that, and that's the second temple. The third temple then would be Herod's temple, and what distinguished Herod's temple, we'll show here in just a moment, is that he basically came in and he doubled the size of the temple of Zerubbabel. He made it, I think it was 16 or 17 acres of Solomon's, and when Herod built it, it was almost 40 acres. It was huge, and made this thing quite a place to see. Now, that was the third temple. Now let's put it in historical perspective. Here's where now we're going to try to put everything into a timeline. Solomon built the first temple right around 1000 BC, something like that. And it was destroyed in 586. The prophets of Jeremiah, Isaiah, all were warning the Israelites that Babylon is going to come. Habakkuk is the most graphic of all of them when God says, I'm raising up the Babylonians. And Habakkuk basically had a fit. He got angry with God and said, give me your reasons why you would allow that. Well, the Babylonians first invaded Jerusalem in 606. And then in 586, they leveled the temple and took everyone. And Daniel would have been taken in that first or second invasion back to Babylon. That's how long that lasted. Destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. Then in 536, the remnant began to return from Babylonian captivity. And you look at that and say, okay, that 50 years here, I thought the captivity was 70 years. It was. Time from 606 to 536 is 70 years. But they were already beginning, as they were told, that they would return. And if you remember in the book of Daniel, it was Cyrus who found the records and asked Daniel to tell him, you know, what this was is my people's city. And he commissioned a group to return back to Jerusalem to begin rebuilding the temple. That is what the book of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Haggai are about. Those books are speaking specifically to the Jews of their commission. It's time to rebuild the temple. God says, you're living in your tented, walled, paneled houses. He said, where am I living? Where's the house for God? And that was in the book of Haggai. He scolded them basically and shamed them. So they said, all right, we need to get together. We need to start rebuilding the temple of God. And that's where Zerubbabel then was commissioned. The temple of Zerubbabel, they completed it in 530 BC. And unfortunately, that just lasted a couple of hundred years, because the worship began to decline. People's interest in God just waned, and they thought, you know, it's not that big a deal. They didn't have the same sense of nationalism as the people when Solomon built his. But I mean, you look at that, goodness, it's been, you know, almost 500 years since Solomon had built the temple. So the second temple of Zerubbabel is in decline, let's put it this way. And the last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, is God's final warning to the Jews that they better remember the law of Moses, because he's going to come back and he's going to tear everything down and he's going to start all over. And Elijah is going to start it all. And of course, the last chapter of the Old Testament, speaking of Elijah, you've probably studied in the past, that was actually a prophecy of John the Baptist. As Jesus explained in Matthew 11, he said, yeah, that was John. John came. And so the worship was in decline. And then there was a period of about 400 years of silence. That's between Malachi and Matthew. What happened in the interim? This is where sometimes, maybe occasionally there would be a class called the period between the Testaments, or the 400 silent years. There's a few books that have been written about that. But the basic outline of that is in Daniel chapter 11 and 12. And people will take these last two chapters of Daniel and they will concoct all kinds of fancy theories about aliens coming and invading and future events and doomsday, etc., etc. What it is saying that basically they're going to come in and destroy the temple. Now I'm going to give you just a few little tidbits about this here without going into great detail. If you remember in the book of Daniel, the image that Nebuchadnezzar had seen, this great image, the head of gold, and then the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, and the legs and feet of iron and clay mixed, as it was interpreted by Daniel to the people. We found out that these were the four kingdoms that God says going to come. The gold head was Babylon. They were the greatest of the glory. The chest and the arms of silver were Persia. The belly and thighs of brass were Greece. And the legs and feet of iron and clay were Rome. Those four world empires. The most famous Greek, Philip of Macedon, started the nation, and his son Alexander the Great is the one who brought it to its zenith. When Alexander the Great died, well, far away from home, as still a relatively young man, he had 4 generals. And we read about that in the book of Daniel, about the ram with the 4 horns. These were the generals of Alexander. And 2 of those came to the forefront. And it developed into the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The Ptolemy was one of Alexander the Great's the generals, and another general from Syria and the region where they were called Seleucids. And in Daniel, that's the army of the north, Seleucids, and the south, the Ptolemies. Ptolemies were Egyptians. And what happened is that as worship was in decline in the middle of this, the Ptolemies just came in and took the temple right around 200 BC. They kept it for a little over 30 years, and then the Seleucids, in their unique way, they came in and took over, and they defiled the temple. Anybody remember some of the things that maybe from Daniel or other things of what they did? In particular, Antiochus Epiphanes was his name, and they began to call him Antiochus Epimanes. Epimanes means madman. Epiphanes meant I'm the illustrious light here. He's the one who brought a pig into the Holy of Holies and slaughtered it and put pig's blood all over the temple. Now, how do you think that would go with the Jews? It was so defiled, they left it. And it eventually just fell into disrepair or pagan use. And that's what happened to the Second Temple. And it would be destroyed during that period of time. So the first temple lasted about 415 years, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. The second temple, the Temple of Zerubbabel, lasted only about 230 years, and it was destroyed by the Seleucids, somewhere between 200 to 167. 167 is the date given of when the pig was slaughtered on the altar there in Jerusalem. And they just stayed away from the place. So it was in disrepair. And it was Herod that would build the third temple on top of the ruins of the second temple. And he began that in 20 BC. And that temple lasted only 90 years because, of course, it was destroyed by the Romans in AD 7. So this is just, pardon me, excuse me, this is just a thumbnail sketch about the three temples. Actually, they have what sometimes is called two second temples. Zerubbabel is the second temple, Herod's is the second of the second. It's just kind of a weird kind of wording on that. But these are the three distinct separate temples that were on the site there in Jerusalem during this period of about 1,000 years. Any questions? You ready for the test?
What?
Okay, Ethan's ready.
All right, what's there now?
Anybody want to answer that? Dome of the Rock.
Dome of the Rock, yeah. The walls are still there, but a big portion of the Wailing Wall is one of the walls of the Temple Mount.
Right. You see on news that the Jews, that they're praying. That's the basis of the Temple Mount that Solomon had built. And the pieces that you see today on the news, they don't fit because they had to rearrange them because the Romans tore all that down. But interestingly, you go in and then you'll go down about 50 feet, and the very foundation is still there. And those are the stones that you think, how on earth did they move those? They're 40, some 60 feet long. They're multiple tons, and they're chiseled out and then fitted together so perfectly, not taking any back seat to the pyramids. It was extraordinary how they did that. And those stones are down there, and you can see them. But the temple, and you've heard me say this. Maybe you weren't in class either, but it still just astounds me, and it will till the day I die, that that dome, that mosque, that Muslim place of worship is sitting right on top of the most holy site of the world, and they can't touch it, or they won't touch it. And the reality is, they could touch it if they wanted to. What is keeping when you go over there and then you realize the scale of the Israeli army, air force, power, wealth, the Palestinians are like little chihuahuas barking at a Great Dane. They have got profound strength, and they could go in there and take it like that. What's keeping them from doing it? Because they want to rebuild the temple, and everyone wants to, and people all over the world have contributed to rebuild the temple. I think the answer, very simply, is the hand of God.
Yes.
He told them it would never be rebuilt. And when everything is in place to do it, and has been in place now for generations, it's not being done. It's not going to happen. That, to me, is a stunning example of the providence of God. A second one along with it, I'm going to get way out of here, but people wonder, why is it that people still hate the Jews when even the Jews themselves can't fully agree on their own identity other than we are Jews? Hand of God. The blessings and cursings, well, you heard me give that lesson a couple years ago from Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. That's still there. I mean, it's just, you stand back in retrospect and look at the whole panorama. The hand of God is from top to bottom, beginning to end, in all of that. And if it's not, nothing makes sense. It makes no sense. Barry?
I believe it's the south side. The Muslims came in later when they were building the Dome of the Rock and all that, and they walled up the entrance.
Yeah.
Because the Christians, premillennialists, said that that's the gate that Christ would return to. The Muslims were not going to allow that. And they built a graveyard all along the base of the south wall and to further defile the site. Because the dead bodies are there.
To add to that, but yeah, that's right. You can go online today and see quote called the East Gate, and it's just all walled up. But a postscript to what Barry just said about all of those graves. They're edge to edge to edge to edge, and that entire hillside, which is rather steep, is just filled with those graves. And most of them are people who paid exorbitant sums to be buried there. Why? Because they want to be the first one to see Jesus walk through that gate. Their belief is that when our Lord returns, he'll come through the East Gate. And so that's why it's just, and across over by the, across the valley, the Kidron Valley, the whole hillside just covered with the tombs, just covered with them. The only little area that's not covered with tombs is the Gethsemane, the garden. It's a little corner there that they've left alone. So it's extraordinary how that happened. But the hand of God is all over that. And of course, we understand why this temple would never be rebuilt, because as Paul explained, we are the temple of God. Where does God reside? He resides in lives and hearts of faithful believers. Faithful, obedient believers. That's where God lives. Yes. Okay. Any other comment? Okay, Joey.
Do you have any idea how long it took them to build these structures? I'm sure they had thousands of workers, but...
Yes. I can't think of it right offhand. I want to say it was a couple of years for Solomon. I'm not quite sure, but you're right. They had all these artisans from around the known world at that time. I should know that answer. I'll go back and I'll read that tonight and get it, and I'll give a group text to everybody in San Diego County. So you can see that. Yeah, Barry?
You mentioned the Garden of Gethsemane and facing that wall, and that it's steep going up to the walls of Jerusalem.
Right.
And it never really dawned on me, but when you read the story of the betrayal and Peter pulling out his sword and all that, it reminds me of the Frankenstein movies. But you could just picture the mob coming down that hill, winding down the hill, carrying a torch to come get Jesus, and he's sitting in that garden watching them.
So I'm waiting on you.
It's pretty amazing.
You come out, you come against me as a thief? He said, if I was a thief, I'd have been running away. I'm here waiting on you. Yeah, this is part of the plan. And his own disciples scratching their heads, they couldn't figure that out. He said, I've been telling you for 2 years, I've got to come to Jerusalem to die. And they just never was able to compute, put all those pieces together here with us. But this is basically a brief synopsis of the three temples. And if you have questions, you can ask me later, or you can jog that down. You can go online and find information about it, but that gives you the basic historical perspective of the three temples. So Herod built the third one. He built the last one. And ironically, it was the shortest of the bunch. Solomon's lasted the longest. The Seleucid Zerubbabel's temple lasted just really over a couple of hundred years, because then, as it was invaded and destroyed by the Ptolemies and then the Seleucids, it was Herod who would, quote, bring the glory back to the people. And he put it on a grand scale. Of that, there was no denying. People did not cry when he built the temple. They just complained, said that he's not allowed to go there, which he wasn't. Once it was consecrated, he was not allowed to go in it. But I'm sure he said a number of times in private, I built it, I can't even go in it. He built it for them. Okay, all right, now for no question, we're gonna go on here now to Herodian. And Herodian is his own personal palace. He will build two palaces in Jerusalem. One down in the city that there's nothing left of it, but it was a grand palace filled with several apartments, 2 or 3 score, 50, 60 apartments, all each decorated lavishly for heads of state. So Herod would receive all of these people from around the world in Jerusalem at his palace. But it's gone. What he built that stayed was this right here. This was his personal home. And he built it on top of that hill. But what you're looking at here is that is a swimming pool. He built this giant swimming pool down in front of his home. And this is where they would go out and have lavish parties, etc. At the Herodium. And moving on, this is a view from the top. It was a castle. It was a round castle, and it had 4 turrets, or four little castle things on it. And this right here, come back here. This is the royal staircase right here that would go up to the home. And this was private for him and him alone. But the interesting thing about this is that for decades, generations, people didn't know where Herod's tomb was. And they were looking for it, and the archaeologists, etc., were down there by the pool looking at the flat, saying, it's got to be in here somewhere. Herod died in Jericho. Jericho was as we mentioned Sunday, this was the Riviera of the place down in the Dead Sea, beautiful climate, fertile ground. When they brought the report back of the fruit that was so big and the people, etc. That was all from Jericho. Jericho was a very lush, like the Coachella Valley on steroids. It could grow anything, and it had everything. And it had this beautiful river coming through that. But they finally found his tomb on the side of the hill at the Herodium. And here is what they found as they began to dig down and dig down. This is a theater that he built, and this is his skybox. You can go in there, and he had a lavish room in there that was built for he and his friends and guests for this theater, where they would hire people, for plays and all kinds of entertainment, etc., like that. And it was up here that they finally found his tomb. But the reason why they didn't find his tomb, because Herod was so hated by the time he died that he had a long list of instructions. And one of them was that he would be brought back to the Herodium to be buried, because he had built all this ahead of time. And so they had a funeral procession from Jericho all the way back to the Herodium, and then they buried him. He also had a long list of everyone that had to be executed, including family and friends, and a long list, and they took the list and threw it away. We'll bring you back and we'll bury you there, and that's it. And what happened was, as time went and their hatred for him grew, they took his sarcophagus, it was basically like his tomb, and they busted that to pieces, took his body out, no one ever would have happened to it, desecrated it, and scattered it to the wind on the side of the hill. Because one of his requests No, it would be stronger than that. One of his requirements or law, that when he died, he wanted the entire palace of Herodium covered with dirt so that no one would find it. And they didn't for several centuries. It wasn't until they moved the dirt away that they found, hey, look what we found right here. For centuries, this was just another hill outside of Bethlehem. But it's when they started digging and they found this, hey, look at this, look at, whoa, what's this? And they began to put all this together, and in the year 2007, they discovered his tomb. That's how recent this was. Up until 2007, they still didn't know where he was buried. But it was all right here. Here's the staircase going up to his home, and there's his tomb. They took the pieces and put it back together. It was made of some kind of pink alabaster. That color doesn't really come out very much, but they were able to put the pieces back together, and that is in the Jerusalem Museum, the tomb of Herod. It's empty. There's no one in there, at least that I know. But that's what he had built and where he was buried inside, on the side of his hill, and then everything's covered up. He didn't want anybody to find it. Kind of like the pharaohs with the pyramid. They're going to be buried so deep and with secret passages that no one would ever find it. Of course, what he was worried about was not losing his money, because he had investments and money spread everywhere. People were going to get hold of him. He was worried about desecration himself. He was worried about that. And because he knew he was hated. And when he finally died, they had the last laugh, as we say here. And to me, this is the most ironic and stunning fact about the Herodium. This is a picture taken from the top, and it's looking out towards Bethlehem and Jerusalem there. Here's the pool that we showed a moment ago down on the ground, where everyone would have parties, and you see how big this whole colonnade was here around the pool, and all the festivities, etc., etc. What we read of Herod in Matthew 2 is that he gives word that the King of the Jews has just been born. And he's living. Of course, he fakes that he's very interested, sends the wise men out to find him. This to me is just so poetic. He's living right here on top of this hill, and Jesus is born right over there. Right under his nose, Jesus is born. He doesn't know. He'd go to the extent of murdering everybody to find him, and he still didn't get him. So Jesus was born right under his nose. He never knew it. It's just, to me, it's just such a, sometimes you think about how God worked, and it gives you chills about this. But this is Herodium. And you can go over there, and my son that flies for United, he said, Dad, he said in March, they're opening flights back to Tel Aviv again. So they're now opening up these flights. Maybe we'll be able to go over there. Somebody someday can get over there, and you can go to this. It's a public place, and you can go there. And a lot of climbing and a lot of stuff to see. When you go inside, you get a little peek at how they lived, how lavish it was. And the thing that struck me about it is that it all looks like those pictures that we've all seen online or maybe on TV or video of Pompeii. The interiors of Pompeii, of Herodium, of Ephesus, they all were very similar. They used the same kind of paint. They would take a paint and mix it in the plaster so that they didn't paint on the wall. The paint was in the wall. And that's how much of it has been preserved. And it's usually the same colors. It's a dark scarlet red, a black. There'll be a dark green in there. And that's their major colors, and they will paint pictures on the wall. They didn't have pictures. They just would paint the frame. In the Herodium here at the Skybox, he had a room there, and he's got 4 or 5 paintings of windows that are opening out. One painting shows the windows opening out on the Nile River. and there's a little crocodile that's swimming down the river. And it was just the fanciful imaginations of someone who had no budget, who could just buy anything and build anything. And so that's what he did. That's why he was the builder, and hoping to get into the good graces of the people. But it didn't work out for him because, as we said, when he died, they busted everything up to the point that we couldn't even find it until 2007. I'm going to throw this out here before the last buzzer hits here. The last city we're going to see is Caesarea. When we finished the book of Acts, we were studying here at the palace. This is basically where we were studying, and all of the events that happened right here on this spot right here. But just as an introduction to you, to show you there are four major elements to this. There's many more. This was a very extensive, progressive city. But the palace that he built for himself, and then the ensuing leaders of Judea. The theater right here, this is a single, there'd be a double pier on top of it, but it's gone now. But this theater is going to play into the New Testament. We're going to read about that. Right next to the palace is the Hippodrome. This is where they race chariots through the Hippodrome. And then over here is the harbor. These buildings that are there were not relevant to the time of Herod. These were later built by invaders in the Ottoman Empire. So they have no bearing on it, but just past that is the harbor. And we're going to look at the harbor, and I was listening to one historian here the other day, and he said, I really do believe that the harbor of Caesarea is one of the great 8 ancient wonders of the world. He said, it is extraordinary what happened. We'll talk about how all that came to be. But his plan was to build a city that would honor Caesar and that would become the central point for all of that region of Judea, Palestine, Syria, later Assyria, etc. Everything is going to flow right through there. And it did. And so it became a profoundly wealthy city. Philip and his 4 daughters lived in this city. Acts 8, when he was told to go talk to the Ethiopian eunuch. It was no small little spot. It was basically one giant sand dune. And he came in there and built a city on top of the sand dunes. And that's why it's so extraordinary. So we'll look at that Sunday without going into anything else. Any question or comment about what we've said so far? Okay. All right. This is a class just to give us a little more background about Herod, the man who will kill all these babies. Herod, the man who was so insanely jealous to the point of paranoia. If you go online and read about his last years, they believe they have a pretty good idea, though they don't have the body, but by the accounts from Josephus and Strabo, that he died of a very severe kidney disease because it was painful, his body was racked with sores, and he became delirious. And it was crazy. Someone thought maybe that's why in his dying wish he said, I want these people dead, and listed a long list of people that he wanted dead, because he just gone insane. But part of that was stoked by his paranoia. That's why I'll show you in a chart here in a couple of weeks all the people he killed.
Yeah. Has that theater been modernized? Is that?
Nope.
So it looks like
Looks great, doesn't it?
stadiums that we go in today.
Yeah, it was great. Matter of fact, they still have plays in there. Yeah, and I'll show you the stage and how that worked on that. It's really incredible how he did that. Okay, thank you.
I can tell that's not
That's good.
See what a week Hey, you know, Josh?
And the weather is just
Yeah, it's either Luke or Walmart. There you go. Yeah.
We went to see the tax man and Caleb went in a couple months. He's like, sure, I didn't learn how to do this. I was like, okay. He has the tax thing. He says, so what jobs can you have where you don't have to pay any taxes at all? And she said administrator.
I would say that's how they do it. They get some good deductions.
Nice people.
Hey, Jay. Hey,
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Hope you had a good Bible class. We had the teens doing workout weights, so all your teens have worked out tonight. They're doing good. Thank you all for being here tonight. I don't have a whole lot of announcements, so other than there will be a Teen Devo on March the 16th at Kenny and Dewey's house, which most of all you guys will already know about or will know about via text soon, but I want to announce that just because if you are interested in hosting the teens for a Devo, please come see Evelyn, myself, or Ryan, and we'll get you on that schedule. If there's nothing further, then I'll turn it over to Barry.
did forget to tell James one thing. Leon Goff passed away, I believe it was yesterday. It was either yesterday or Monday. Anyway, Leon was Julie's uncle, long-time preacher, married almost 75 years, all that kind of stuff, and his service will be in Texas this coming weekend. But anyway, those of you who knew the Goff family, and Leon has held meetings for us here. He was actually here just 2 years ago, I think it was. Came and visited with us, so anyway.
Yeah, at her funeral.
Yeah, George's funeral, that's what it was.
I mentioned that, his dad was an elder here.
That's right, Floyd was an elder here, Julie's grandfather. So anyway, just so you know, that's going on in their lives, and they will appreciate any prayers for them. Oh, every time I kneel to pray, I open up my heart to my Lord. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the sweet embrace of my Lord. I don't know why so many things seem to get in the way of seeing my God's glory, but I try every day to see Him and to thank Him for all the things He's given me. Every time I see a child, I see the gentleness of my Lord. Every time I watch a storm, I know the awesome power of my Lord. I don't know why so many things seem to get in the way of seeing my God's glory, but I try every day to see Him and to thank Him for all the things He's given me. Every time I see the cross.
Good evening. Good evening. That was a perfect song for what I'm going to talk about. Because first I got a really good question. Who so far today has lived a great, great life and has no problems at all? No. Well, that's what I thought. Only one person. Everybody's got issues and problems. And things can get in the way of following God. And, when you look at Hebrews and you look at all the faithful people that Hebrews talks about, how many of them didn't have problems? How many of them lived the perfect life? Like, I know Moses did. He didn't murder that Egyptian. The guy just fell over dead in front of him. Everybody's got issues. So there's an encouragement that's in Hebrews 12. So I'll read that. And it's always good to keep this in mind. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and you have forgotten that word of encouragement and addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone who he accepts as a son. So, the whole point is that keep our eyes on Jesus Christ. Remember, life's not perfect. And when things look down, always look up. Always. Okay, now you can stand and be ready for the last song and a prayer. Oh, if you do need encouragement, there's lots of people here that can give it. It's not like that. That's important.
Oh, who else commands all the hosts of heaven? Who else could make everything bow down? Who else could whisper and darkness tremble? Only our holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. What other beauty demands such praises? What other splendor outshines the sun? What other majesty rules with justice? Only a holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Who else could rescue me from my failing? Who else would offer his only Son? Who else invites me to call him Father? Only a holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. There's nothing further, we can let our closing prayer.
Shall we pray? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful day that you've blessed us with this rain, this opportunity to come and gather as believers, open up your word, sing praises to your name. Heavenly Father, we pray that you will be with us as we go to our homes, that you'll bless us the rest of this week, and that we will let our light shines in this dark world. Pray that you will be with the Goff family as they mourn the loss of Leon. Pray that you will be with them, you will comfort them, and they will be reminded that they can be in heaven with you and him one day. We ask all these things in your Son's holy name.